Hey guys, welcome to the session on Salesforce interview question and answers. Salesforce is the world's #1 customer relationship management platform and is used by many Fortune 500 companies. They have more than 40% market share in the cloud CRM space and dominate the overall CRM space with a market share of 19.7%. Salesforce is growing at an incredible rate, and along with that, the need for skilled Salesforce professionals is also growing. So today's session is for individuals who are preparing for any Salesforce job. Could be Salesforce admin, developer, or consultant. You can also watch this video if you want to gain some knowledge about various Salesforce concepts. But before we get started, let us take a look at the agenda for today's session. We will start the session with some of the important Salesforce interview question and answers. Next, we'll see some of the tips to become a Salesforce developer and then conclude the session talking about Salesforce certification training. So starting off with the first basic question, what is Salesforce? You can answer this by saying Salesforce is a cloud-based software company which provides CRM services and along with that also provides various software solutions and a platform for users and developers to develop and distribute custom softwares. Salesforce offers a variety of products for companies such as the Salesforce Sales Cloud, the Marketing Cloud, Service Cloud, Community Cloud, Analytic Cloud, App Cloud, and a couple of more services. Each of the services has its own functionalities and can be used by different teams in a company. Like the sales team can use the Sales Cloud, the support team can use the Service Cloud, and so on. So this was about Salesforce. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what exactly is CRM and how is it helpful? CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management, and it means a strategy or a technique which is used by businesses to maintain a healthy relationship with the customers and the potential customers. CRM also includes managing all the interactions with the customers. Now talking about some of the benefits of using Salesforce CRM, it helps in enhancing the communication with the customers. Next, when you understand customers and their needs better, you can provide them with the improved customer service. Next, it aids in improving analytical data and reporting, so you can use this data for further references also. Moving on, CRM is also a great tool for automation, which relieves our businesses from repetitive and less important tasks, and they can focus on the more important tasks first. The fifth benefit is it provides greater efficiency in managing multiple teams and can also be customized to help in individual clients' account planning. So these were some of the benefits of CRM. Now I guess you have some idea about what exactly is CRM and what are some of its benefits. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what are tabs in Salesforce? A tab is nothing but a feature in Salesforce that displays custom object data that is embedded in a particular application. Some of the tabs in Salesforce are custom object tabs, web tabs, flexible page tab, lightning page tabs, and Visualforce tabs. Now moving on to our next question, what do you understand by Sandbox org and define the different types of sandboxes available in Salesforce? Okay, first let us understand what is Sandbox org. A sandbox is a copy of the production environment used for testing and development purpose. So this was the definition of Sandbox org. Now let us understand this with an example. So let's say in a company there are various departments which requires data for different purposes, like for development, for testing, or for training. So to use these functionalities, Salesforce offers a feature that makes different copy of the production organization called a sandbox. These sandboxes are isolated from the main production, and hence whatever operation are performed on these sandbox will not affect on the production organizations. So I guess you have understood what exactly is Sandbox org. So now let us see what are the different types of sandboxes available in Salesforce. We have Developer Sandbox, Developer Pro Sandbox, Partial Data Sandbox, and Full Sandbox. So this was about Sandbox and the different types of sandbox in Salesforce. Now let us move on to the next question. The next question is, what is Salesforce Lightning App Builder? The Salesforce Lightning App Builder is a point-and-click tool, which means it is a drag-and-drop tool that makes it easier for you to create custom pages for the Salesforce mobile application and Lightning experience. With the Lightning App Builder, you can build a single-page application that drills down into standard pages, or you can build dashboard-style application such as application to track top sales prospects or the key leads for the quarter. You can also customize the record pages for your object, which can be tailored to the need of the user. And you can also customize the Salesforce homepage, which contains the components and features that the user uses the most. So this was about Salesforce Lightning App Builder. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is explain governance limits. Governance limits are the limit that controls the number of records you can store in the shared database. Now this is because of Salesforce multi-tenant architecture, where Salesforce uses a single database to store the data of multiple clients or customers. They set this governance limit so that no single client controls the shared resources. The different governance limits in Salesforce are size-specific apex limit, per transaction apex limit, static apex limit, email limits, Force.com platform apex limit, and miscellaneous apex limits. So this was about Salesforce governance limits. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is the difference between Salesforce.com and Force.com? So as we have talked about Salesforce before, you know what is Salesforce.com. It is nothing but a software as a service CRM application, whereas Force.com is a platform to support the developers and businesses in building customized enterprise applications. One of the major differences between Salesforce.com and Force.com is Salesforce is a software as a service product, whereas Force.com is a platform as a service product. Next, Salesforce helps the user to store data and application, and Force.com helps in building and operating applications that are connected with the Salesforce data. So these were some of the differences between Salesforce.com and Force.com. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what do you understand by Visualforce? Visualforce is a framework that allows developers to build custom user interfaces that can be hosted on the Lightning platform. It is a markup language which is similar to HTML, and developers can use it for performing tasks like developing user interfaces, defining the custom tabs, and integrating and customizing the sidebars in the Salesforce console. They can create and customize help pages and also add menus in Salesforce One. Visualforce can also be used to manage the home page in the account tab. So this was about Visualforce. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is Lightning Component Framework? Lightning Component Framework is a user interface framework for developing web applications for mobile and desktop devices. It is a modern framework for building single-page applications with dynamic responsive user interfaces for Salesforce platform app. In this, the developers can use JavaScript, HTML-like markup languages, and CSS to create the applications. So in simple terms, it is just a framework for developing web application for mobile or tabs or desktop devices. So now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is the difference between roles and profiles? Talking about roles first, it controls the level of visibility that user has in its organization's data. The primary function of role is that it allows higher level of users to get access to the records owned by the lower level users. An example of this would be a sales vice president getting access to the records owned by several sales managers, while the peers do not get access to it. Next, talking about profile, a profile is a collection of settings and permission that controls the user. It controls what they have to do in the application and what access they have. Like the sales team has access only to the sales related application and data. The next difference between roles and profile is, it is not mandatory that a user should have a role, but it is mandatory to define a profile for a user. So now I guess you have some idea about what are the difference between roles and profiles. So now let us move on to the next question. The next question is, what are the difference between Lightning Component and Lightning Web Components? Lightning Components, as we know before, are a user interface framework that is used to create applications for desktop and mobile technologies on Salesforce. Whereas Lightning Web Components are an updated web standard-based framework method for creating Lightning components on the Salesforce platform. Lightning Web Components are simpler to define and develop greatly because they are in line with the updated web standards. Our next question is, what is Salesforce Lightning? Salesforce Lightning is a new user interface by Salesforce. It comes with a convenient new design, more productivity tool, and more functionalities such as artificial intelligence. With Salesforce Lightning, you can build personalized responsive application without writing a single line of code. So now moving on to the next question, what is time triggers in Salesforce? Well, a time-dependent actions are executed at a specific time. Let's say, for example, 10 days before a record's close date. So when the specific time passes, the workflow rule reevaluates the record to make sure that it still meets the rule criteria. If the record does, the workflow rule executes those actions. This is known as time trigger. Now, example for time trigger in Salesforce would be you can choose a time to call a client or send email to a client or even schedule a time to discuss about a particular product to a client. You can automate all these tasks by setting a time trigger. So this was about time trigger in Salesforce. Now let us move on to the next question. The next question is, what is object relationship in Salesforce and what are the types of it? So to understand this question, let us first understand what are objects and what are the types of objects. Now objects are nothing but database tables that allows you to store data specific to an organization in Salesforce. There are two types of objects. The first one is standard objects and the other one is custom object. Standard objects are objects provided by Salesforce.com. Example of standard objects could be accounts, contacts, opportunities, or leads. Next, custom objects are objects which are created by the user. Custom object stores information that is unique and important to the organization. Now, object relationship is used to link custom object records to standard object record in a related list. Majorly, there are three types of relationship in Salesforce.com. The first one is lookup relationship, next is master detail relationship, and next we have many-to-many relationship. So now I guess you have some idea about object relationship in Salesforce. So let us move on to the next question. The next question is, how is a lookup relationship different from a master detail relationship? Lookup relationship are used when you want to create a link between two objects, but without the dependency on the parent object. As a master detail relationship, the master controls some trait of the child, which is detail, and both are tightly connected. Thus, when working on the master detail relationship in Salesforce, it is compulsory to define the parent record for the particular detail. Another major difference is that when a master or the parent in a master detail relationship is deleted, the child details also get deleted automatically. However, in a lookup relationship, when one object record is deleted, the other one does not get deleted. So these were some of the difference between lookup relationship and master detail relationship. So let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, can you give some example of Salesforce APIs and its usages? Salesforce has a variety of APIs that can let you interact with the system in different ways. Some of them would be the REST API. The REST API lets you integrate with Salesforce application using simple HTTP methods in either XML or JSON formats, making this an ideal API for developing mobile application or external clients. Next, there is Bulk API, which provides a programmatic access that lets you quickly load data into your Salesforce organization. Third, we have Streaming API that can be used to receive notification for changes to the Salesforce data that matches a SoQL query you define. Streaming API is useful when you want notification to be pushed from the servers to the client based on the criteria that you define. So this was about Salesforce APIs and its usages. So now let us move on to the next question and see, what is Salesforce Lightning Design System? Salesforce Lightning Design System is a CSS framework and component library which helps developers and designers to create a user interface based on Salesforce Lightning principles, the design language, and the best use cases. With the design system, you can build Lightning pages and components, mobile application accessing Salesforce, and standalone web application which are served by Android, iOS, Heroku, and some similar platforms. So this was about Salesforce Lightning Design System. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is Audit Trail? Audit Trail helps in tracking the recent setup changes made by the administrators of your company. It displays the information about the changes to your Salesforce in the last 6 months. But for viewing the changes, one needs a permission of View Setup and Configuration. If you have this permission, you can check things like the date and time that the changes were made, the last user who made the changes, and what changes did they make. Moving on to the next question, define workflow in Salesforce. Workflow is nothing but a logic which helps in automation of tasks related to specific business processes in Salesforce. You can automate tasks like you can send an email alert, or you can send an outbound message, or you can automate a particular task or automate a field update. Our next question is, what is an external ID in Salesforce and which all field data types can be used as an external ID? An external ID is a custom field which can be used as a unique identifier in a record. They're basically just IDs which are mainly used for importing data and records. So when importing records, one among the many fields in the record should be marked as an external ID, which acts as a unique identifier for the record. The fields that can be marked as an external IDs are text, numbers, emails, and auto numbers. These fields should be unique with each other in the record. So moving on to our next question, what is reports in Salesforce? A report is a list of records that meets the criteria that you define. Reports are displayed in Salesforce in rows and columns and can be filtered according to a particular objects. So to understand reports better, let us take an example. So now let's say I have a training institute which offers various courses like Java, Python, machine learning, cloud computing, and many more. Now to keep track of all my courses which are being sold, my customer details, I'm using Salesforce. Now I want to know which of the courses is the highest selling course. So for this, I can use Salesforce report, which will have a set of records that contains all the information about the courses and the customers who have bought them. So with Salesforce report, I can see which of my course is the highest selling course. So I guess you have some idea about what exactly is reports in Salesforce. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is dashboards in Salesforce? Dashboard is nothing but the graphical representation of the data generated by a report or multiple reports. It shows data from source reports as visual components. These components give a snapshot of key metrics and performance indicators of an organization. And another point you need to mention is, for each dashboard component, there is a single underlying report. So this was about dashboards in Salesforce. So now let us move on to our next question and see what are the different types of reports available in Salesforce. There are 4 types of reports available in Salesforce. The first one is the tabular report. The tabular reports are the basic and simplest of any Salesforce report. They just display the rows of data in a table with a grand total. Next, we have summary reports. Now, this type of reports in Salesforce are the most commonly used reports. They provide a listing of data with groupings and subtotal. With summary reports, you can group data based on different criteria and then perform calculation to find out the totals or the maximum or the minimum or averages. Next, we have matrix reports. Now, this type of records are a bit complicated, but they allow you to group records both by rows and by columns. You can use matrix reports when you want to see the data between 2 different dimensions that aren't related. For example, maybe the date and the product. The next type of report is the joint report. These joint reports can be used to group and show data from multiple report types in different views. The data in joint reports are organized in blocks, and each blocks can have its own columns, summary fields, formulas, filters, and sort orders. So these were the different types of reports available in Salesforce. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is a bucket field in reports? Well, a bucket is a custom category that is defined in reporting. It allows you to group, filter, or arrange the related records together by ranges and segment without using complicated formulas and custom fields. So this was about bucket field in reports. Now moving on to our next question, what are dynamic dashboards? Now before we understand what are dynamic dashboards, let us first understand static dashboards so you know the difference. So static dashboards are the basic dashboard types that will be visible to any user who has made a report out of his data. Basically, a static dashboard shows the data only from a single user's perspective. Now coming to the concept of dynamic dashboards, now dynamic dashboards are used to display information which is tailored to a specific user. For example, the sales manager wants to view the report which is generated specifically to only one of his team members, then he can use dynamic dashboards for it. So now moving on to the next question, explain various Salesforce dashboard components. The first Salesforce dashboard component is chart. Now charts can be used when you want to show the data in the reports graphically. There are 6 types of charts to choose from. First is the horizontal bar chart or the vertical bar chart or the line chart, pie chart, donut chart, and the funnel chart. The second Salesforce dashboard component is gauze. You can use a gauze when you have a single value that you want to show within a range of custom values. For example, if you want to show the revenue for a month, whether it was high, medium, or low, you can show it with the help of gauze. Third, we have metrics. You can use a metric when you have only one key value to display. For example, if you have a report showing the total number of particular products sold or is expected to be sold in the current month, you can name the value as a particular product selling target for the month and display it on the dashboard. The fourth Salesforce dashboard component is table. You can use a table to show a set of report data in column form. For example, if you want to see the top 5 selling products for your current month, you can do that using tables. The fifth Salesforce dashboard component is Visualforce page. You can use Visualforce page when you want to create a custom component or show information which is not available in another component type. So these were some of the Salesforce dashboard components. So now moving on to our next question, what is data skew? Data skew refers to a non-uniform distribution of the underlying data. This leads to stuck stages and tasks, low utilization of CPU, and out-of-memory errors. This data skew is usually experienced while working for some big client with over 10,000 records. So there are three types of data skew. First one is the account data skew. This happens when too many child records are associated with the same parent object in one of the relationship. Then the imbalance would cause account data skew. The second type is ownership skew. This happens when a single user owns more than 10,000 records. Third, we have lookup skew. Lookup skew happens when there is a large number of records which are associated to a single record in the lookup object. So this was about data skew. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, explain skinny table and what are the considerations for skinny tables? So in Salesforce, skinny tables are used to access frequently used fields and avoid joins. These skinny tables have proved to improve performance significantly. Now how does it improve the performance? As we can see in the diagram here, for each object table that is visible to you, Salesforce maintains other separate table at the database level for the standard and custom fields. Now this separation is invisible to the customers and ordinarily requires a join when a query contains both kind of fields. A skinny table contains both kind of fields and also omits soft deleted records or recycled bin records, which helps speeding up the queries, thus improving the performance. Some of the consideration for skinny tables would be, skinny tables can contain a maximum of 100 columns. Next, skinny tables cannot contain fields from other objects. Also, skinny tables don't include soft deleted rows such as recycled bin records. Next, you need to contact the Salesforce support to recreate tables or add new tables. So now moving on to our next question, what is Apex? Well, Apex is a proprietary language developed by Salesforce.com. It is an object-oriented programming language that allows you to execute flow and transaction control statements on the Force.com platform. One interesting fact about Apex is its syntax is 70% similar to Java. So if you've worked on Java before, you can easily learn Apex then. Some of the functionalities of Apex would be, you can add web and email services to your application or perform complex business processes. It can be used to add complex validation rules to your application and can also be used to add one or more custom logics. So now moving on to our next question, what are the different types of collections in Apex? So there are three main types of collection in Apex. The first is list. Now list is an ordered collection of elements which is distinguished by their indexes. Now list elements can be of any data type. It could be primitive type, collection, user-defined types, or built-in Apex type. Next we have sets. Now sets is an unordered collection of elements that do not contain any duplicates. Set elements can be of any data type. It could be primitive, collection, user-defined type, or built-in Apex type. And third we have maps. Now a map is a collection of key value pairs where each unique key maps to a single value. Now this keys and value can also be of any data type. Now I guess you have some idea about the different type of collection in Apex. So now let us move on to the next question and see what are getters and setter methods. Well, the get method or the getter method is used to pass value from the controller to the Visualforce page, whereas the set or the setter method is used to set the value back to the controller variable. Now look at the code snippet over here. Now here you can see we have used the get method to return the name, which is to pass value to the Visualforce page. And the set method is used to make the first letter of the name uppercase and the rest lowercase. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what do you mean by an interface in Apex? So an interface is like an Apex class in which none of the methods have been implemented. It only contains the method signature, but the body of each method is empty. So to use an interface, another class must implement it by providing a body for all the methods contained in that interface. Also, all the interfaces in Apex are global and the methods in the interface are public and abstract methods. Moving on to our next question, what is SoQL and what is it used for? Well, SoQL stands for Salesforce Object Query Language. It is very similar to the widely used language SQL to query databases. But SoQL is designed only for Salesforce data and is used to query the Salesforce platform to retrieve data. SoQL can also be used with Apex and Visualforce to return sets of data. So this was about standard object query language. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is button overriding? Well, you can override the behavior of standard buttons like the new, view, or edit in Salesforce Classic, Lightning Experience, and mobile independently. For example, you can also override the tab home page that displays when a user clicks a standard, custom, or external object tab. Now moving on to our next question, what is the difference between a standard controller and a custom controller? Talking about the standard controller first, standard controller in Apex inherits all the standard object properties and the standard button functionalities directly. It contains the same functionality and logic that are used for standard Salesforce pages. Next, talking about custom controller in an Apex class implements all the logic for a page without leveraging a standard controller. Custom controllers are associated with Visualforce pages through the controller attribute. So this was the difference between standard controller and custom controller. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is 𝐻oID and WhatID in activities? Well, 𝐻oID in Salesforce refers to people things. Example of 𝐻oID would be lead ID or a contact ID. Basically, the 𝐻oID represents a human such as a contact or a lead. Next, WhatID in Salesforce refers to object type things. Example of WhatID would be account ID or an opportunity ID. The WhatID represents non-human objects such as accounts, opportunities, campaign, cases, or custom objects. So I guess you have some idea about what is 𝐻oID and WhatID. So now let us move on to the next question and see what is the use of an outbound message. An outbound message is nothing but an automation function that allows sending a message to external web services or an application when the record is created or updated in the Salesforce. These external web services can contain field values to introduce other processes in the external systems. Now, outbound messages can be triggered by using workflow, approval process, and entitlement process. So this was about outbound message. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, how can you call a controller method from JavaScript? So to call a controller method that is an Apex function from JavaScript, you need to use action function. This question can also be asked as, what is the use of action function? So you can answer this by saying it is used to call a controller method from JavaScript. Now look at a piece of code here. Here you can see the function JS method called from any action calling the controller method from JavaScript. Moving on to the next question, what do you mean by batch Apex in Salesforce? Well, actually, batch Apex is used to run large jobs that would exceed normal processing limits. Using batch Apex, you can process record asynchronously in batches to stay with platform limits. So now to process every query separately, it will take you a lot of time. So batch Apex allows the breaking of a single job into flexible batches. So let's say you have 10,000 plus records you have to execute. So instead of executing all of them at once, you can batch the record, for example, a batch of 200, and then process this 200 records at one time. Then after that, you can move on to the next 200 and so on. So I guess you have understood what exactly is batch Apex in Salesforce. So now let us move on to the next question and see what are the methods to implement batch Apex. So in order to use the batch Apex, you need to write Apex class that implements database batchable interface and make your class global. Next, you have to implement the following three methods. The first one is the start method. This method is called once at the beginning of the batch Apex job and is used to collect the records or object to be passed to the interface method. The next method is the execute method. Execute method performs an operation which we want to perform on the records fetch from the start method. And last, we have the finish method. Now this finish method executes after all the batches are processed and is used to send confirmation email notification. You can see the syntax for all start method, execute method, and the finish method. So I guess you have some idea about what are the methods to implement batch Apex. So now let us move on to the next question and see what are the difference between SoQL and SOSL. Well, we have discussed about SoQL in question number 33. So I guess you have some idea about it by now. So let us talk about Salesforce Object Search Language or SOSL first. SOSL is a Salesforce search language that is used to perform text searches in records. Now talking about some of the differences between them, the first difference would be SoQL returns record, while SOSL returns fields. Next, SoQL uses select keyword for the retrieval of record from the databases, whereas SOSL uses find keyword for retrieval of record from databases. The third difference is in SoQL, only one object can be searched at one time, whereas in SOSL, many objects can be searched at one time. Next, in SoQL, one can query any type of field, but in SOSL, one can query only email, text, or phone number. So these were some of the major difference between SOQL and SOSL. So now moving on to the next question, is it possible to edit Apex class or triggers in the production environment? Well, the answer for this is no, it is not possible. We cannot directly edit the Apex class or trigger in the production environment. It can only be done in the developer edition, Sandbox org, or the testing org. Moving on to our next question, what is Apex trigger? Now, Apex trigger performs custom action to the record in Salesforce before or after the events. Examples of such actions include insertion, updation, or deletion of records in Salesforce. The trigger helps in performing operations that are subjected to specific conditions, such as modifying related records or restricting certain operations. Triggers can be used for anything you do in Apex, executing SOQL or data manipulating language, or even calling custom Apex methods. So there are two different types of triggers in Salesforce. The first one is before trigger and the second one is after trigger. Before trigger is executed to validate the record values before saving to the database, whereas the after trigger is executed to validate the record values after saving the database. Now I guess you have some idea about what is Apex trigger. So let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, how can you call an Apex class in Salesforce? Well, we can call an Apex class in Salesforce from the following ways. The first one is from the Visualforce page or from the developer console. We can also call the Apex class from the JavaScript links or by using a trigger. Next, you can call an Apex class from another class or from homepage components. So these are the various ways you can call an Apex class in Salesforce. So this brings us to the next question. If required, can two users share the same profile? Well, the simple answer for this would be yes. In Salesforce, it is possible to assign a similar profile to different people or teams or managers. The advantage of this would be at the same time the entire team or the group of people can hold access to crucial data. So for example, the HR team named the HR profile can have access to candidates, employees, lead data, and all the information they need. So these were some of the important and frequently asked Salesforce interview question and answers. Now let us move on to the next topic and see some of the tips to become a Salesforce developer. Before we start this, I would like to say there is no such prerequisites to become a Salesforce developer, but companies do ask for a bachelor's degree in computer science or some similar discipline. You should have good knowledge of at least one object-oriented programming language and some basic understanding of Salesforce. So if you have just started your journey in Salesforce or are planning to start your journey in Salesforce and become a Salesforce developer, I would highly recommend you to start learning a few Salesforce technology. The first of this would be Visualforce. As we have talked about Visualforce in the interview question part also, it is a markup language for creating custom Salesforce pages. Now why is this important is because it is useful to build application on the Salesforce platform. You need to know how to develop user interface and write application logic. So as a Salesforce developer, you can develop the user interface using Visualforce. So that is why Visualforce becomes very important if you want to become a Salesforce developer. Next, after developing the user interface using Visualforce, a Salesforce developer needs to know how to add business logic to the applications. You can write controller code and add custom logics to your application using the Apex programming language. So even Apex becomes very important if you want to become a Salesforce developer. So start off by learning Visualforce and Apex. Next, along with these tools, it will be very helpful if you learn JavaScript, HTML5, CSS programming languages, and a few web development tools like the Eclipse IDE and Git. After this, my third tip would be to learn from online courses. There are a variety of online courses and tutorials to learn the basic and advanced aspect of Salesforce development. Also for learning purposes, Salesforce offers Trailhead, which is a free platform for courses combining theory and practice of Salesforce development. The next tip is preparing and getting a few Salesforce certification, which brings us to our last topic for today, which is Salesforce certification training. Now, preparing for the certification will not only improve your knowledge, but can also be very helpful during your job interviews, as organizations need certified people. This is because clients generally prefer companies whose employees are certified, as it gives them assurance with regard to quality. So this is why I would highly recommend you to take Edureka's Salesforce certification training, which is curated by industry professionals and will help you learn how to customize your application, including page layouts, fields, tabs, and business processes. It will also help you create a secure Salesforce environment, maintain and import clean data, create high-value reports and dashboard, and set up a workflow automation. So with this, we have come to the end of this video. I hope it was helpful. Do comment your valuable thoughts in the comment section below. Happy learning!